During the period of 1820 to 1860, many immigrants came to the United States from Europe, mainly northwestern European countries like Ireland, Germany, and from the Scandinavian countries. Other countries include Sardinia, Greece, Poland, Turkey, Malta, Persia, and Morocco, as well as England, France, and Germany. Over 5 million people arrived during this time, with 3 million coming in the years between 1845 and 1854 alone. These people represented 15% of the population, which was the largest percentage addition to the country before or since. Improved means of transportation, increased freedom of travel, and safer food crops led to the influx of people immigrating to the United States. Germany had an excess population due to the legislation where land was split between all children of the landowner. This created many small farms that were too small to support their owners. The Germans were liberal and contributed to U.S. politics. They also had more money than the Irish and were able to buy more land that was usually in Wisconsin or out west. They contributed to American culture but didn't like to speak English and spoke German much of the time, much to the dismay of many old Americans. They also contributed to education by starting kindergarten and were dead set against slavery. This made them very unpopular in the South but very popular in the North. Ireland's 1845 potato famine was the main contributor for the large amount of Irish immigrants settling in the United States. Irish immigrants were discriminated against in the U.S. when they arrived. They were poor and competed with many blacks for low-paying jobs. Many people disliked them for this. Also, many people disliked the Irish immigrants because of their Catholic religion. The Protestants hated this aspect of them. Many came to big cities like Boston and New York. Additionally, many were illiterate and discriminated against by older Americans for this. Eventually, land ownership came about and Irish children were given the right to an education. They were also attracted to politics and many became police officers. As in the rest of Europe, Scandinavia began to have better health care and saw their population increase drastically in the 2 decades before the Antebellum period. Poverty and hunger were 2 obvious reasons to immigrate. Another was the strict religious policies of the region. The Lutheran Church was the official faith, and the citizens of the 3 countries were required to follow its rules and support it with their taxes. Dissent was severely repressed, and Quakers, Mormons, and Baptists who had established missionary groups were subject to prison. The religious freedom of America therefore exerted a strong appeal to the many converts in Scandinavia. With so many foreigners pouring into America during this time, many Americans became fearful and discriminatory to the new immigrants. Catholics and Irish who are Catholics received the brunt of this and were not given equal status for a while. People feared they might take jobs. Catholics had been persecuted since the first British settlers arrived in America. When a bunch of Catholic people arrived in America in 1820, anti-Catholicism became a lot harsher. There was political opposition against Catholics, propaganda in dozens of Protestant newspapers and periodicals, and individual and mob violence. In urban cities where there were many poor Irish immigrants and many working Protestant people, Catholics were basically viewed as unwelcome competition for these men. Catholics were viewed as unrepublic, and as many people wanted to tyrannize others. When the U.S. gained land west of the Mississippi, people feared that spread of Catholicism might increase. Some thought that Catholic people were planning to conquer the United States. The suspicion and dislike they faced was nothing new in American immigration history, but it was probably the worst prejudice that any immigrant group had encountered yet. Because of their great numbers in their Catholic faith, Americans, even those who had come as immigrants a few years before, feared that the country would be overrun by the Irish and that its Protestant English culture would be swamped. In fact, the Catholic Church was greatly strengthened in the United States by the addition of these millions of members, and today ranks as the country's largest single religious organization. Many older Americans also hated the Irish because they generally voted on the Democratic ticket. A thread of anger at and fear of foreigners had run through the fabric of American thought since the early colonial days, but in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, the Irish brought that feeling to a head. Secret societies began to form to protect America from foreign and especially Catholic influence. Anti-immigration sentiment, while not new in American history, its first official expression was in the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798, reached new heights during this period. An Ursuline convent in Charlestown, Massachusetts was burned down in 1834 by an angry mob, and priests and nuns were murdered on the streets of Philadelphia during the 1840s. The fear that inspired such acts were various and not always clearly defined. Some thought that the Pope was plotting to assume control of the country through secret Catholic agents, or that American culture was in danger of being replaced by a foreign, inferior way of life. The most realistic fear was that the foreigners would take jobs from Americans because they were willing to work for less. In 1835, the distinguished artist and inventor Samuel F.B. Morse, who built the first telegraph, wrote a passionate call for an end to immigration, which he saw as an international conspiracy to infiltrate the United States. This book's thesis was clearly stated in its title: Imminent Danger to the Free Institutions of the United States Through Foreign Immigration.